My name is Maurice Davis, and about a decade or so ago, I was a member of the UK government's Ministerial Advisory Panel on Illicit Trade, and I can see some other of my former panel members here. At that time, we achieved a few things. We got the UK government to finally ratify the UNESCO 1970 Convention and a few other things. And we also, in a subsidiary piece of work, produced some guidance called Combating Illicit Trade, aimed at UK museums. And as far as I can tell, those guidelines are still in use by UK museums. And what those guidelines did was to set a standard for UK museums that said if there was any doubt about the licitness of an item, then museums should avoid it. And essentially, the requirement now for museums in the UK is that to acquire an item, you either have to have clear evidence that it was out of the country of origin before 1970, or that it has proper export documentation from its country of origin. And I've been away from the issue for about a decade, and what's really struck me here today is how the volume of illicit material that's being trafficked has really hugely increased since those days. Now, in those days, we had a much lower standard for the art trade, where the art trade codes don't set this if you've got any doubt, avoid it standard. And we've heard cases today of things appearing on the market, lots of them. And I suppose I would like to ask our panelists if they would like to see the art trade adopt a standard similar to that in museums, where really if you have any doubt about an item, almost if there's any possibility it's been looted recently, you should simply avoid it. So I'd be interested to hear what the panelists think about that.
We certainly have a member of the art trade who's going to be speaking later on this afternoon, and perhaps it would be better to wait until he's available to actually address things, if James is happy with that. Sure. Excellent. Okay.
Sue Miller from ICOMOS. I have one comment and one question. I'm very interested that many of the talks have said how much capacity building is needed, how many jobs for archaeologists and heritage professionals are required. And I have a skepticism that this is, in a sense, war is job creation. Destruction is job creation for our industry on a large scale. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, but that's a general impression I'm getting. And that's not a cynical comment. It's one of capacity building and one of that, in a way, our cultural heritage industry is not accepted as a large-scale industry, sufficient to achieve the objectives after post-conflict that everybody's been talking about. And linked to that, I have moved from a straightforward archaeologist and museum professional to being very much involved in cultural tourism internationally. And I'm prompted to ask this question after Lesani Sisi's contribution, who's a member of the International Scientific Committee for ICOMOS on cultural tourism. 60% of the business opportunities afforded by cultural heritage have gone in northern Mali. This is very key. They've gone to a large extent in Libya, if the continued destruction goes on. They've gone to a large extent not in museums, but in the wider archaeological sites in Iraq. And they're going in Yemen. So my concern for us as heritage professionals is, where are the priorities for future development? When I saw the YouTube video, my concern was we will create a Nimrod Disneyland with all our documentation, our photographs, our experience and our expertise. We will have eventually Disneyland in Iraq. It may not be a bad thing, but I wonder what the panel thinks.
Is the microphone switched on? Well, I won't attempt to answer all of your questions. There was a whole series of them and comments, I think, but only one, which was what you said towards the beginning about job creation. I'm very clear in my mind, at least with Iraq, which is all I'm qualified to speak about, that anything that anybody does must be to support the Iraq government. And I think that's the help that they need. When we talk about capacity building, we don't mean sending foreign archaeologists to Iraq to help them sort out the mess, but rather providing resources so that in the long run they can do it themselves. So I see it very much as an effort to provide, it's not just expertise, but money. They're going to need massive amount of money and expertise as well to sort out this terrible mess, and that's where we'll need to help them in due course. I'll leave the other parts of your question to other panelists.
Okay, can you hear me? I would like to comment on the capacity building question, because the capacity building is not our idea. It's really the wish of the countries we were working in. They want us to help them to educate our colleagues and the students in these countries. And for example, Tunisia hired about 200 new conservators after the revolution, which are an urgent need of training programs. So this is a field very much connected to our research. As you know, the German Archaeological Institute is a research institute which has a history of 185 years, and the capacity building was not all the time part of our engagement in other countries. But nowadays, it's almost impossible to think of working in other countries without that aspect. It's extremely important, and it's maybe more important than other parts of our engagement in these countries.
I would like to add a comment to Iraq. In this respect, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities there 1 year ago hired 500 new employees for the ministry or for the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. All of them come from universities with a BA level and without any practical expertise. So to our experience and our concern is that vice versa, without a proper further education, we will create Hollywood sceneries over there. So developing an understanding on cultural heritage approaches according to international understandings is more than necessary for my feeling.
And for the time being, war is not really a creator of jobs for archaeologists, but rather the opposite. As I mentioned in my talk, the academics from Mosul University have essentially they are unemployed, they've been forced to flee the city, so they are no longer in work right now, and only hope that at some point they'll be able to return and take up again their work in and around Mosul. With the help, I think, we need, to the extent we can, to provide them with.
Yes, Catherine Hickley, I'm a journalist. I have a question because there have been a lot of talk in the newspapers about a potential military force to protect antiquities, an international military force. And I wonder, for those of you working on the ground and who know these regions very well, whether you can see any situation where that would be beneficial, helpful, or necessary even, or whether you think this is something that will disappear, a bit of a hot air discussion.
Sorry, I did not understand.
Well, I can address this in terms of Mali. Essentially, at the very beginning of the start of the conflict, the military was tasked to some degree to protect Timbuktu and its heritage. Now, the will of the army wasn't strong enough to stand up to the forces that ultimately invaded Timbuktu. And this has been the case in all the major cities in the north. In some instances, I think, and in some countries like Mali, the military itself is not representative, at least ethnically, of the people who live in the northern part of the country. And so essentially it's very difficult to send different cultural groups up to northern Mali, which is a whole different region and cultural region, and have them protect cultural monuments. There's not interest in terms of the groups that make up the military, and there's resistance from groups to these southern ethnic groups coming up and protecting these monuments. So it's a bit of a complicated situation. And unfortunately, I don't think the military resolution is going to help.
Yes, this is the same for Yemen, especially in the tribal area where the control of the state government is not working at all. There's no way to protect a site by military. So the only way is, as I try to express, is to employ, that the state employs the tribal people and that they pay the tribal people to keep the sites and to keep the fines from the sites.